Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The UCP gave Premier Daniel Smith a ringing endorsement at the AGM over the weekend. A number of policies were also discussed. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have the details. More Alberta sheriffs will be hitting the streets in our province, working with local police to cut down on crime. And a special poppy flag-raising ceremony took place at City Hall in Lethbridge as our city prepares for Remembrance Day ceremonies next Monday.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The UCP held their annual general meeting in Red Deer on Friday and Saturday. Around 6,000 party members attended. All 35 policy resolutions passed. Premier Daniel Smith received a 91.5% approval rating from the members who attended.
I'm truly humbled and honored by the overwhelming support of our party members and your vote of confidence in my leadership. Our Conservative, thank you, really. Conservative movement is stronger than it's ever been. Our party is more united than it has ever been.
Now, during the convention, Premier Smith touted her government's accomplishments and promised to fight for personal freedoms for all Albertans.
We must be unapologetic and bold in our protection of personal freedoms, in promoting low taxes and free markets, in upholding parental rights and school choice. And in our steadfast defense of Alberta's sovereignty from Ottawa. And my commitment to each of you today is to do exactly that.
Now, I asked our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson, who reported on the UCP annual general meeting, if the ringing endorsement by party faithful vindicates the work Smith did over the summer to appease the grassroots within her own party.
It's a bit of a complicated question because, yeah, it's a massive endorsement. But it is also the endorsement just of the 6,000 people who are there. So what it is, though, is it sidesteps one of these questions that has sort of dogged Conservative Party leadership reviews for a long time, and that is what is the sort of threshold needed to stick around. We look back to Jason Kenney's leadership review in 2022. He got 51.4%, I think. He said, well, that's not enough to stick around. Ralph Klein got 55 or so percent back in 2007, I think. That was not enough for him to stick around. Alison Redford got 77%. I believe she's stuck around for a bit longer than that. But it's always been a bit of an open question, what is this threshold?
Mr. Dawson will also discuss why a movement to have Daniel Smith removed as party leader failed at the convention. He'll have details coming up in the second half of our program. Canada's Energy and Environment Ministers announced Ottawa's plan to limit greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the Trudeau government says the plan would set a cap on greenhouse gas pollution to 35% below 2019 levels. Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault says these cuts will drive innovation and create jobs in the oil and gas sector. He says that sector is the biggest culprit when it comes to climate pollution.
Canada's oil and gas sector account for almost a third of our climate pollution, more than double combined pollution from all other heavy and light industries. And the oil and gas sector has also been experiencing record profits. Those profits have grown tenfold since the pandemic, going from $6.6 billion to $66 billion. So we're asking the oil and gas sector to invest their record profits into pollution-cutting projects that can create and keep good jobs. Canadians can be proud of hundreds of thousands of oil and gas workers leading on transformative new technologies. The tools are here to cut pollution, and across the world there is a consensus on the need to transition to a cleaner future.
Last month, the Alberta government launched a national ad campaign targeting Ottawa's incoming emissions cap for the oil and gas sector. Premier Smith says the industry simply cannot absorb the costs of the cap and, quote, it's going to increase the cost of everything. Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer criticized Minister Guilbeault on the Trudeau government's production cap. He says all it will really do is severely hurt the Canadian economy while allowing other countries to flourish.
All this production cap will do is make other countries richer while making Canadians poorer. Exactly. But that's something this Prime Minister is so good at. Consider this, GDP per capita in Canada, down. In the US, it's up. 9 years ago, average wages in the US and Canada were almost identical. Now, an American worker brings home $22,000 more than their Canadian counterpart. And $500 billion in investments has fled Canada to the United States, creating bigger paychecks for American workers, all because of this Prime Minister's high taxes and massive deficits. The Prime Minister is the #1 job creator in the United States. Yeah. So instead of helping the Canadian economy, why not fight for Canada for once?
According to the Government of Canada website, there are around 400,000 jobs in the oil and gas sector. Premier Daniel Smith also took issue with Minister Stephen Guilbeault's attack on our energy sector. Smith says Alberta doesn't need the Ottawa-made plan since we have plans of our own.
We have Heidelberg that is working towards a final investment decision for net zero cement, which will decarbonize cement, which is the second most traded commodity in the world. All of that is happening right here in Alberta. We have the Pathways Project, which just started a pathway to get to net zero by 2050. We have Capital Power and others who are looking at ways that they can bring nuclear into our province, which takes time to be able to develop the regulatory process and get approvals. We have seen dramatic improvement on the part of our largest producers because they're investing in technology. Technology takes time. You cannot snap your fingers and say it has to be done by 2026. You cannot snap your fingers and say it has to be done even by 2030 or 2035. The only way to achieve these unrealistic targets is to shut in our production.
The Alberta government announced the creation of a new team of Alberta sheriffs to help combat crime in central Alberta. Public Safety Minister Mike Ellis says the Red Deer Scan team, made up of 4 Alberta sheriffs, will join similar groups in Lethbridge, Calgary, and Edmonton. They'll work with local police to shut down criminal activity, including drug houses in various communities.
Scan is a term that many Albertans have become very familiar with in recent years. It was created in 2008 to help seek out and stomp out criminal activity plaguing Alberta neighborhoods and residential areas, places where Albertans should never have to worry about their safety and, of course, the safety of their loved ones. They are always meant to augment and support all local police services right throughout the province, and it would be no different as it is here in the Red Deer area. The unit has proven tremendously successful since its inception, investigating almost 10,000 properties associated with drug trafficking, human trafficking, and of course, other criminal activity. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon for these properties to be situated next to schools and playgrounds, next to homes of law-abiding Albertans as criminals try to hide in plain sight. Again, all places where people need to feel safe.
Ellis says the Red Deer Scan team will cover a lot of central Alberta, including Ponoka to the north and Olds to the south. Lethbridge police have released numbers related to their targeted enforcement initiative, which tackles crime and downtown disruption. Between March and October of this year, 302 outstanding warrants were executed. 217 people were arrested for open drug use. 167 criminal code charges were laid, and 1,345 doses of methamphetamine and fentanyl were removed from our streets. 4 stolen vehicles were also recovered, and 13 encampments along with 50 people who were trespassing were removed. Deputy Police Chief Gerald Grobmeyer says the initiative continues to yield positive results, with others planned for next year as more officers are assigned to the downtown core. He says if you see any suspicious or criminal activity in your neighborhood, to give them a call right away at 403-328-4444 or 911 if it's an emergency. The City of Lethbridge continued its Remembrance Day campaign this week with a poppy flag raising ceremony which took place at City Hall. Now, throughout the month of November, 4th Avenue, where City Hall is located, will be appropriately named Veterans Avenue, with banners of local veterans lining along the street. In commemoration, the poppy flag will overlook the street throughout the month of November. The Legion says the poppy has been widely embraced by the community and encourages everyone to participate in wearing one this month.
Well, the poppy flag is a remembrance of all the veterans and soldiers and from the wars. It's just so that we can continue to remember their contributions and sacrifices through the wars and stuff, that we'll continue to remember them for years to come. We have over 400 or 500 poppy boxes throughout Lethbridge. To me, it's lovely to see the young kids and stuff wearing it. If you look down the streets or in the malls, you see many, many people wearing them. It's a strong bond that Canada has that keeps our country together in remembrance. So all across the Canada, you'll see everybody in cities, towns, everywhere wearing the poppies. It is very proud to be a Canadian to see that happen.
Now, as for Remembrance Day ceremonies, two will be taking place. There will be a parade and service hosted by the Legion indoors at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center on Monday morning, with the doors opening at 10 a.m. There will also be an outdoor ceremony at the Cenotaph beginning at 10:45, also on November the 11th. Well, we had lots of cloud cover in some areas of southwestern Alberta today, even saw a little bit of moisture. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, we could see more of the moisture developing perhaps this evening?
Yeah, we'll see some showers developing after midnight, and after that, those showers could actually turn to snowfall by the morning or remain as showers. Now, if it does change to snow, we are looking at 2 to 4 centimeters of snow. Also, winds from the northwest at 30, gusting to 50 kilometers per hour, changing to northwesterly winds, gusting up to 70 kilometers per hour, seeing a daytime high of 2, but then temperature dropping in the afternoon to -2. So we've got a lot going on weather-wise over the next 24 hours. But would you believe it if I told you that we're still seeing some high teen temperatures headed our way later on in the week? I'll be back later in the show to tell you all about that. Hal?
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Representatives from a coalition of 43 national health organizations presented a study outlining 3 major areas they see need addressing here in Canada's healthcare system. They said one of the most critical areas includes a shortage of healthcare workers. A spokesperson with the Health Action or HEAL group says the healthcare system we built many years ago needs innovation to help meet the needs of so many Canadians, and that includes more money.
Increased funding, more agile approaches, and systemic reform are all needed to ensure that Canadians' health needs are met now and into the future. The 3 pillars we will discuss today are addressing the health human resource crisis, investing in mental health parity, and enhancing community-based care. If implemented, the key recommendations outlined in this consensus document will enhance the accessibility, quality, and sustainability of healthcare services for all Canadians.
The BC port employers are preparing to lock out more than 700 foremen as it awaits the union's promised job action. After issuing a 72-hour strike notice on Thursday, officials with the International Longshore and Warehouse Union Local 514 said they would take limited job action. Now, in response, the BC Maritime Employers Association issued a notice of lockout in the event of a strike action, describing it as defensive action that would shut out all cargo operations but leave cruise ships and grain vessels operating. Alberta is continuing to build wildfire corridors to make our highways safer, especially on those connecting our province to British Columbia. A new overpass east of Canmore is nearly complete, and a wildlife advocate says it's already doing its job.
This project has been a long time coming, and it's Alberta's first overpass outside of Banff National Park. So where we are right here is a really important sort of crossroads in the mountains for wildlife as they move east-west and north-south. And it's also, a really busy section of the Trans-Canada with over 30,000 cars a day coming through here in the summer. So, the location is key, both from a wildlife movement perspective, but also a human safety perspective. It's an area that's seen a lot of collisions, mainly with deer and elk over the years. So the crossing and the fencing are really going to help make the road safer for people and wildlife.
Well, Tuesday is election day south of the border in the United States. And so far, the polls say it's a pretty close race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Analysts say the swing states, such as Michigan and Pennsylvania, may become the king or queen maker. We have more on this report from the Associated Press.
The presidential campaign comes down to a final push across a handful of states on the eve of Election Day. Donald Trump is closing out what he says will be his last campaign day for the White House with a jam-packed schedule that includes 4 rallies across 3 battleground states. Kamala Harris is spending all of Monday in Pennsylvania, where 19 electoral votes offer the largest prize among the states expected to determine the outcome. Over the weekend, Republican nominee Donald Trump asked voters to make him the leader of a failed nation, while also unleashing a conspiracy-laden rant, asserting U.S. elections are not legitimate. He also suggested he shouldn't have left the White House after his 2020 loss. Democratic nominee Kamala Harris countered from a Michigan church that God offers America a divine plan strong enough to heal division, and declared that Tuesday's election offers voters the chance to reject chaos, fear, and hate in favor of a more unified country. The starkly different tones from the former president and sitting vice president comes as this year's race has careened through a felony trial, an incumbent president being pushed off the ticket, and multiple assassination attempts.
Now, in a furious final push before Election Day, Donald Trump kicked off 4 rallies in 3 states on Monday, and it began in the battleground of North Carolina, as you just saw. Trump urged locals to make sure they get out and vote.
This is really the end of a journey, but a new one will be starting, and that's the one we've wanted to partake in, which is basically to make America great again. And now we'll have a chance to do it after today. Hopefully, everything will work out well. We're way leading. All we have to do is close it out. We have to close it out. If we get our vote, there's nothing they can do. So essentially, you know, they have an expression, I hate the expression actually, but it's ours to lose. Does that make sense to you? It's ours to lose. If we get everybody out and vote, there's not a thing they can do.
Meanwhile, overseas, TBN Israel correspondent Yair Pinto went underground at a tunnel in southern Lebanon that was allegedly used by the terrorist group Hezbollah. Pinto joined the Israel Defense Forces to showcase the rooms, supplies, and living quarters Hezbollah set up underground.
It kind of brings me memories from the Gaza Strip, but the magnitude of these tunnels is just completely different. This is a whole new level. It's just huge. And this is only a few hundred meters from the border with Israel. This was supposed to be used in order to equip the terrorists before they carry out their ground maneuver into the northern part of Israel. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is My State, a program about current events, my belief in God, and my journey in the Holy Land. And this is a Hezbollah terror tunnel in southern Lebanon, where only a few weeks ago, the IDF conducted a ground maneuver to root out these terror cells from carrying out an October 7th style attack against Israeli communities and against Israel at large.
Lana Walsh is a local sleep and insomnia expert. She says when it comes to restless nights of sleep, the time change can really throw off our bodies. Now, we recently fell back an hour over the weekend. Walsh says getting your circadian rhythm is very important. She says you can do so by getting more sunshine.
When you get up on Sunday morning, get outside, get some sunshine, or at least sit in an east-facing window, get as much bright light first thing in the morning to get that circadian rhythm kicked into gear, and stick to your normal eating times that you normally do. So if you normally get up at 7 and eat by 9, make sure you're eating by 9 and make sure you have your lunch at your regular time, because that is something you can control that can help get your circadian rhythm back into the rhythm of the new time shift.
Make sure you catch the full interview with sleep and insomnia expert Lana Walsh and BCN's Naveen Day coming up in the second half of our program. Well, we did have some sunshine mixed with clouds and a little bit cooler today in Lethbridge, and there's a chance of some showers developing later this evening. Full weather details are coming up. We saw lots of cloud cover again in parts of southwestern Alberta again today, with even a little bit of moisture. Jeanette Roche is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, could any of that moisture potentially turn into snow?
That seems to be Mother Nature's plan. Yes, we're seeing some showers developing tonight, and then by the morning it could make its way into snowfall. So if we see that snowfall, we could see 2 to 4 centimeters of snow. Also that +2 dropping to a -2 by the afternoon. So that seems to be the ugly day of the week, because look what we have in store for us for the rest of the week. So we're going to jump back up into the sunshine, into the pluses. 5 for Wednesday, up to 13. See, I told you we'd see some teen temperatures there. 13 on Thursday, could see up to 16 degrees on a Friday, well above average. 14 for Saturday and 11 degrees for Sunday. So it looks like it should be a lovely week ahead of us. We just need to get through that to Tuesday, don't we? So average high for this time of year, 6 degrees, not 16, 6. -5 is the average low. 23 was our record high on this day, happening back in 1940. 1919, we saw -23, which was the record low. 8 to 27 is when the sun rose this morning. Now, because of standard time, going back an hour, 6:02 is our sunset this evening, so giving us 9 hours, 35 minutes of daylight today. Okay, on the West Coast, lots of things happening. So there was a wind warning in effect earlier today in Victoria. They saw up to 100-kilometer-per-hour gusts. By tomorrow, though, that should be dying down. Mix of sun and cloud, high of 10 degrees. Vancouver also saw 2 weather alerts in effect today. So a winter storm warning along the Coquihalla Highway. That would be the Hope to Merritt area. And then Vancouver, Metro Vancouver and Fraser Valley saw heavy rain, strong winds as well, but then dying down to 60-kilometer-per-hour winds tomorrow with a mix of sun and cloud, 9 degrees for the high. Tomorrow, Edmonton could see 2 centimeters of snow, high of 2 degrees, 1 degree in Calgary with 30% chance of flurries and up to 60K winds there. So in Saskatoon, we're seeing periods of snow ending in the morning, risk of freezing rain, high of 1 degree. In Regina, 60% chance of showers in the morning, 60% chance of flurries by the afternoon, risk of freezing rain there as well. High 4 degrees, 6 for the high in Winnipeg, and nothing going on there but sunshine, so it should be pretty decent in Winnipeg. As we look to the central part of the country, mix of sun and cloud in Toronto, 22 for the high. Could see some showers in Ottawa tomorrow, 20 for the high there. In Montreal, both Montreal and Ottawa seeing 30 to 50K winds. Montreal could see a slight chance of showers there as well. High of 21 degrees. I'm loving those 20s there that they're experiencing still in the central portion of the country. Okay, lots of rain on the east coast, 60% chance of showers in all 3 of these cities. Pairs of 12 there for Fredericton and Halifax. Charlottetown sitting at 11 degrees, could see up to 50K winds there, and 40K winds expected tomorrow in St. John's with a mix of sun and cloud and a high of 4 degrees there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
A new report says vehicle sales were up 8.8% in October compared with the same period last year. The study by DeRosier estimates 162,000 units were sold in the last month, which matched the October 29 sales numbers. The group says the auto market was fairly strong, with only a couple of players seeing a sales decline for the month. DeRosier says the auto market is on track to hit an annual total of 1.8 million vehicles sold for the first time in 5 years. Now, for those who believe that bigger is better, there's some good news coming. Manufacturers and retailers are rolling out more double XL TV screens measuring more than 8 feet across. Now, that's wider than a standard 3-seat sofa or even a king-size bed. Supersized TVs, however, only accounted for 1.7% of overall TV revenues in the United States so far this year. According to analysts, companies preparing for shoppers to go big for the Christmas holiday season have reason to think that the growing ultra category will be a bright spot in an otherwise lukewarm television market. Air Canada reported a profit of just over $2 billion for the third quarter. That is up from $1.25 billion in the same quarter last year. Sales, however, were down from $6.34 billion to $6.11 billion during the same period in 2023. The airline says it now expects its capacity for 2024 to be up around 5% from the year before, compared with earlier expectations for growth of between 5.5% and 6.5%. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up just under a point today to 24,256. The Dow was down 257 points to 41,794. The S&P 500 was down 16 on the day to 5712, and the Nasdaq was down 59 points to 18,179. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 218 to 71.67 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 12 cents to 2.79 US. Gold was down $1.21 on the day to 27.35 US an ounce, and silver was up a cent to 32.44 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.38 per bushel, barley's at $6.29, canola's at $14.58, and corn is at $7.52 per bushel. Live cattle December contract was down 85 cents to 185.08. Feeder cattle were up $1.75 to 264.05, and lean hogs December contract was down 85 cents to 83.23. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 71.90 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, the Conservative Party of Canada, along with UCP, blasted Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault as Ottawa drafted regulations to cap pollution in the oil and gas sector. Guilbeault says the proposed regulations would cap greenhouse gas pollution to 35% below 2019 levels. Both Premier Daniel Smith and CPC Government House Leader Andrew Scheer say that would cause extensive layoffs in our energy sector, plus hurt Canada's GDP. Premier Daniel Smith recently had a leadership review at the UCP annual general meeting in Red Deer over the weekend. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have details for us momentarily. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. The UCP's annual general meeting wrapped up in Red Deer over the weekend. Premier Daniel Smith received a ringing endorsement from the 5,000 to 6,000 party members who attended. Now, to chat about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, the UCP had their leadership review and Smith received a 91.5% approval rating. Does this really vindicate the work she did over the summer to maybe appease the grassroots within the party?
It's a really good question. The way the UCP runs their annual general meetings is pretty much any member can show up. But you buy a membership, I think you need it like 21 days in advance, and then you can go and then you can vote. In this case, there was no advance voting. So, if we recall the leadership race back in 2022, it wasn't just day of voting, there was mail-in ballots and things like that as well. So this review was strictly the 6,000 people who attended. I think about 4,800 people or so voted. And so it's a bit of a complicated question because, yeah, it's a massive endorsement. But it is also the endorsement just of the 6,000 people who are there. So what it is, though, is it sidesteps one of these questions that has sort of dogged Conservative Party leadership reviews for a long time, and that is, what is the sort of threshold needed to stick around? We look back to Jason Kenney's leadership review in 2022. He got 51.4%, I think. He said, well, that's not enough to stick around. Ralph Klein got 55 or so percent back in 2007, I think. That was not enough for him to stick around. Alison Redford got 77%. I believe she's stuck around for a bit longer than that. But it's always been a bit of an open question. What is this threshold, and whose views are sort of being represented in one of these leadership reviews?
Many on social media were saying that we're really sad is that you had tens of thousands of other party faithful who didn't get the opportunity, like you said, to vote on the leadership. But that's just really how it works with the AGM, doesn't it?
Yeah, that is how it works. Certainly how it worked this time. The UCP is a huge party, right? It's one of the biggest political parties in the country. And this, as it happens, was also probably one of the largest political conventions ever held in Canada. But, you've had at times up to about 130,000 people who are members of the United Conservative Party. And so 6,000 people is, a fraction of that total number. And one of the things that happens at these conventions is you have the most enthusiastic, the most committed, the most fired up group of people who are there. And the UCP has had a demographic shift isn't quite the right term, but you've had a lot of people sign up for the party in the last couple of years who are sort of new to party politics. Maybe they were longtime Conservative voters, but they were now really upset about COVID-19, for example, vaccines, the lockdown stuff. And you had a lot of these people that got involved with the party in the last couple of years. A lot of them were involved in Jason Kenney stepping down at the end of the day. So you have this situation where you have a bunch of new, really fired up members who are very animated by certain things. They're going to the conventions, they're spending the money. And then you have this other, 120,000 people perhaps who maybe they may well be new members as well, but they could also be some of these more longer term committed volunteers, party members, the ones putting out signs, making phone calls that just don't go to the convention. And you're right, we have no idea what, all of those people think.
Now, you had a chance to chat with Premier Daniel Smith, Tyler. She said the AGM was really about being a policy-generating workshop, and now she'll work on policy to make sure that it's supported by the majority of Albertans. Could this maybe potentially backfire with her base?
Well, it could. The thing about a convention is you're obviously talking about the most conservative policy. It would be the same at a Liberal convention. You're talking about the most liberal policy. When it comes time to turn that into legislation, turn that into regulations, there's some stuff probably at the convention that might not be that palatable to the 4.8 million other Albertans out there. So that was sort of the question I'd put to Smith, because she's worked very hard over the past 6 months, as you alluded to off the top, to talk with her party's grassroots, to answer any and all questions that have come before her, to introduce legislation last week with the amended Bill of Rights, with the pronoun policy stuff. These were obvious policies put in place, announced to try and make her party's grassroots happy, because those are things that her party's grassroots wanted. The question in all of these circumstances is really, how do you sell that to the rest of the public? And so the sort of political jargon for this is, do we see a pivot coming out of this? Do we see her turn towards some of the other issues that are out there, education, affordability, healthcare, whatever? But then if you have this really animated group of policymakers who attended the convention, who voted for these 35 new policy resolutions, who are really fired up, if they don't see movement on that, yeah, they might get mad. They could push, in theory, for another leadership review, as happened with Jason Kenney. They could get upset and, try and turf her the next time there's a leadership review. They could stay at home in the next election if they're mad enough. So there is the possibility that this backfires. But of course, and that's the eternal question for any political leader, is what do you do that's going to make your party happy? What do you do that's going to appeal to the voters across the rest of the province? So that's something certainly to watch in the days ahead. Do these policy resolutions turn into government policy, or are they going to sort of walk and chew gum and maybe work on some of this in the background, maybe turn towards some of these bread and butter issues that appeal to a larger swath of the electorate? It's an open question, but in a party like the UCP, this sort of Franken party from two different conservative traditions, the PCs and the Wild Rose, with all these new really animated members, it is certainly something I think that the Premier and her staff are keeping in mind.
I'll have to remember that. Right after Halloween, Franken party. There you go. Tyler, all 35 policy resolutions passed. Now, ironically, a debate over returning to the flat tax was probably one of the closer votes. There was also some debate over declaring CO2 a foundational nutrient for life.
Yeah, the flat tax one was kind of funny. We were all sitting there at the media table, and all the yes votes went up, and then all the no votes went up. And one of my colleagues leaned over and said, was that the closest one we've seen so far? And I said, yeah, well, I think so, actually, which is really weird, because, that's a classic conservative policy. That was the income tax policy that the PCs had for, the 40 years or so they were in government, and it was changed under Notley. And there was a little bit of debate about it, too. Some people saying that they thought that a progressive income tax was a good idea. And then a couple people that said, well, the progressive income tax actually helps me, but I'm, on the point of principle in favor of a flat tax. So it was kind of an odd circumstance, which I think goes to show some of the odd things that are happening within this party right now, that you've got multiple conservative traditions, you've got this real populist streak running through it, that something like that would even be controversial. And you're right, there were a bunch of other things that were debated. There was some stuff about whether transgender women should be allowed in women's washrooms. There was the CO2 as an essential nutrient thing. There was some debate on that one. There was one young man who stood up and said, well, water is an essential nutrient, but you can certainly still drown if you're in too much of it. And there was debates over diversity and inclusion policy in the government. It was a real gamut of stuff, a lot of social policy, a lot of cultural policy. There was another debate about making gender reassignment surgery privately funded, so it would no longer be covered by public health care. That also passed. There was a ban on sexually explicit performances in publicly funded spaces, so that minors couldn't be exposed to it. A whole pile of stuff. And so, as we just talked about, how much of this turns into government policy, how much of this just sort of stays in the UCP policy playbook. It's hard to say, because, of course, if you're Head Nenshi in the NDP, you're looking at some of this and saying, well, bring it on. We'd love to fight an election over some of this stuff.
So, Tyler, let me ask you something. When you covered the AGM in Red Deer on Friday and Saturday, did you see more progressive conservatives, social conservatives, or was it kind of split down the middle?
I would say, that's a really good question. Usually you'd see in the debates over policy, you'd be able to see some of those distinctions relatively clearly. If there were progressive conservatives there, they did not expend a whole lot of their energy arguing against some of the socially conservative policies. And the thing that I found really interesting about this is we all watched Stephen Harper as prime minister, and he worked very, very hard to, on one hand, keep his social conservative base happy, but also he didn't really legislate on many socially conservative issues. It was not something that he felt was going to benefit his party. It was going to be a real electoral risk when they were fighting over seats in, the GTA or the Vancouver area. to go down this road. And that does not seem to be the way that the UCP is approaching this right now. And I think part of it is there are certainly social conservatives who are very concerned about medical treatment for transgender minors or pronouns in schools, things like that. Those are not necessarily the issues that really animate progressive conservatives. That, you know, they're not super hyped about having this fight. That doesn't mean they don't agree with it, though. And that doesn't mean that they don't think that these policies can be sold as sort of common sense policy ideas to the rest of Alberta. So I think that's probably why you didn't see a whole lot of debate on some of these topics, that even if these aren't their policy priorities, even if they maybe don't think this is the wisest policy direction to be going, they may still agree with it. So I would say, generally speaking, yeah, there seem to be a lot of social conservatives, although maybe they wouldn't identify as such, right? You know, if you think social conservatives, you maybe think people who are really still animated by abortion, for example, or same-sex marriage. I certainly heard nothing about either of those things, although there were some anti-abortion advocates, pro-life advocates there. But it certainly was people who were in favor of or excited by some of this social and cultural policy, I think is probably fair to say.
And you know, Tyler, polling has shown that Albertans are very concerned about healthcare, education, and affordability. Some of that was discussed at the convention, including calls for tax cuts and eliminating smartphones in classrooms. Now, there's also healthcare reform underway with large amounts of money to fund new schools. Will the province see any tangible results?
Well, that's sort of the million-dollar question, I think, after, you know, the millions of dollars are spent. This government has been walking and chewing gum at the same time. I think that's fair to say. You know, a lot of attention has been given to some of these cultural policies that we've just talked about, but there is this massive AHS reform going on in the background. There is this new funding that's been announced for 30 or something new schools, like every year for the next 5 years or something like that. Like this is also happening, right? So, but it does seem like a lot of the Premier's attention has been on some of these other issues. You know, I heard from people who said, look, going into this convention, her top political priority had to be surviving the leadership review, so it makes sense that there's going to be a lot of focus on that. And honestly, the media is happier to focus on cultural policy and stuff because it's more exciting than trying to figure out what the heck is happening with AHS reform, which is always complicated and hard to figure out. But because those are the polling priorities that Albertans talk about all the time, that is something I think that the government is thinking about and will need to think about. And you'd mentioned results. Of course, the obvious place where you need to see results is in healthcare. Are wait times going down? Are people getting surgery more expeditiously? Are health outcomes improving over the next couple of years? And part of the reason I think why some of that stuff isn't at the fore right now, the tax cut being a great example. The government announced this during the 2023 election campaign. They have not implemented an income tax cut. Well, the election's not for another 2.5 years or so. Some of those results, some of those cuts, some of those policies, they're going to want to do in the lead up to the election, as opposed to doing it now, and then maybe everyone forgets about it when it's time to cast a ballot.
And a special debate was held Saturday on the Alberta Bill of Rights. Let's talk about that for a moment here. Some amendments were announced last week by the government, but a number of convention goers were upset that they really didn't go far enough. Can you explain?
Yeah, so there had been consultations over the past sort of year on what to do about the Alberta Bill of Rights. And earlier in the summer, late summer, I guess it would have been, there was this draft Bill of Rights that went around the Conservative Party. And it was developed by a number of activists and lawyers calling themselves the Black Hats Gang. And this ended up being endorsed by the UCP's board of directors, this particular document. Now, very few of the items in that document actually made it into the proposed amendments last week. The exception to that, perhaps, is sort of protection for the rights of the unvaccinated. And that document goes quite a bit further in a way that I would suggest would be rather hard to sell to the majority of Albertans. You know, it includes the right to concealed carry of firearms. It includes a clause on right to life beginning at conception, which would obviously have implications for reproductive rights. It allows the use of lethal force to prevent a crime being committed. Those sorts of things that are, you know, very, very conservative policies that certainly would be, I think, a tough sell in downtown Calgary or Edmonton or somewhere like that. Now, that document came up for debate, and basically it was a little bit confusing because this was not a policy resolution. So it's not in the UCP policy handbook. It was just a special debate on this. But the party did vote sort of overwhelmingly in favor of these amendments, these suggestions to be incorporated into the Bill of Rights. So what we'll need to look for in the next week or two is, as the amended Bill of Rights, I think it's Bill 24, that was announced last week. We will need to see what amendments come in at sort of the committee phase. Do any of these suggestions get incorporated, or is the government just going to leave it alone and sort of hope for the best?
So apparently at the convention there was a movement afoot to have Danielle Smith dismissed for not moving aggressively enough on some of the COVID-related subject matter, but it failed, Tyler. So does this maybe suggest that the influence held by some of the party's power brokers, like a 1905 committee and Take Back Alberta, has maybe been overstated, or perhaps they're losing some of their influence?
Yeah, well, they had a lot of power when it came to getting rid of Jason Kenney. You know, that movement was very, very influential. They, you know, to some extent are responsible for getting rid of Jason Kenney. They are to some extent responsible for Danielle Smith being elected as leader. I think that's fair to say. That's probably not overstating their influence. But I think you're right. You know, there was not that much indication at this convention. That 91.5% approval of Danielle Smith really suggests that the people who are the most angry with her, the people that really wanted to see her go, don't have that much power right now. They were certainly lobbying. You know, they were handing out pamphlets and things like that to try and sway people's votes a little bit, but it doesn't seem to have really materialized. So, you know, they did a lot of work to sign up a bunch of new members. A lot of these new members are sort of the result of these campaigns to get rid of Jason Kenney and have Smith elected in the first place. So very influential in that regard, but you know, in terms of them being sort of behind the scenes puppet masters who are able to play queen maker kind of thing, you did not see that this weekend. I think that's fair to say.
He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Thanks again for joining us today from Edmonton.
Thanks for having me, Hal.
We've all had the occasional sleepless night, followed by a tough day at work where you're grumpy and it's hard to focus. That sounds like me sometimes. But some of us struggle daily to get proper rest, which can have a severe impact on our lives. Today's guest may have some help for you in this area. We are joined by Lana Walsh. She is a registered CBTI coach, which stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Insomnia, and she's based right here in Lethbridge. Lana, welcome back to the Bridge City News. It's so great to have you back.
Thank you for having me back.
Great. Now, I understand that you personally have experience with struggling with sleeplessness. Can you just briefly share a bit about that?
Yeah, I struggled with my sleep since I was a young kid, 12, 13 years old. And it kind of just carried on and got worse and worse as my life went on. And I tried everything. You know, I was on drugs and supplements and all the sleep hygiene stuff. I've tried it all. And it really, truly affected my life every day. Like you said, being grumpy and irritable is not fun. My family didn't like me in the mornings before my cup of coffee or my shower. So it really did affect my life significantly. And fixing it has been 100% transformational.
Now, speaking from experience, I'm not much of a morning person. I'm kind of grumpy too, and I'm really active at night. Like, my mind is very creative. Is that something that I should be worried about and someone listening to this should be worried about?
Not necessarily. I mean, we all have a little bit different experience of what our life should be like. And sometimes being a morning person doesn't really work for us. If we have jobs that are more night related, you know, the entertainment industry is a common example. They spend a lot of nights and evenings out entertaining people. So not being a morning person is not really the problem. The problem is if you're not sleeping well when you're trying to sleep. If you're trying to sleep and you can't sleep, or you wake up not feeling rested because maybe something else was going on, that is where the problem lies. And for someone like me, I wasn't sleeping. I was lying awake staring at the ceiling for hours on end instead of sleeping when I wanted to and needed to. So that made me miserable and anxious throughout the day. So if you're going to bed and you're sleeping when you want to, that's really the most important thing. And being a morning person, well, that's just your personal preference.
Well, that's good to hear. Now let's shift back to you now, because you were talking about getting up in the morning and you weren't really pleasant to be around until you had your morning coffee. So can you just tell about how insomnia affected your work and your relationships and your overall health?
Yeah, well, it affected my relationships because I was always grumpy. I was just miserable, especially in the morning. And if you even made a joke about me not being a morning person, I might take your head off. Like it was really bad because what bothered me the most about it, what made me so anxious and frustrated, was that nobody understood what I was going through. They just like, oh, you're just being grumpy for no reason. And it wasn't that. It was, I literally was not sleeping at night. I was being awake and staring at the ceiling and tossing and turning and not being able to sleep when I wanted to. And that was so frustrating. And to have people make light of it was a challenge for me. So my relationships, especially my close family, loved ones, were most affected because you take frustration out on them way easier than you do on some stranger. Right? Work was always a challenge because I was late for work a lot because I would hit snooze and snooze and snooze. I'd struggle to get out of bed. And so then I'd be late for work. I'd have lots of days where I couldn't focus. I couldn't think. I couldn't even figure out what I was supposed to do that day. So I'd spend the day, talking to coworkers and, reading all those subscription emails that you get and just sort of trying to get through the day, but not really being fully focused and present and engaged in my work. And health-wise, well, I spent probably 35 years overweight because I didn't have the energy to exercise. I didn't have the thought process or the desire, the motivation to go to the gym, to even cook for myself. I can't tell you how many nights I would just have cheese and crackers and wine for dinner because I didn't have anything else in the fridge, and that's all I had the energy to make. So my health suffered in that respect. I couldn't lose weight and I couldn't get myself to the gym. So those things affect your health when you don't do that. And just on a side note, I've lost 35 pounds and kept it off for a year now that I've been sleeping well. So I feel really great.
Well, that's really great to hear. And that analogy of wanting to rip someone's head off, we've all heard that before and we laugh at it, yet we've all felt that too. We've all felt like I just wanted when you haven't had enough sleep. Now, twice a year, we either switch to daylight savings time or we switch back to standard time. And for many people, this seems to affect their sleep patterns. Are there studies that back this up? And do people lose sleep because of the time change?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the research out there talks about, how it affects health. Like there's more heart attacks and strokes and hospitalizations and mental health challenges that happen around the different time changes. But it's exactly the same as traveling. It has the exact same effect as jet lag. So when you think about the time change, just think about when you travel somewhere, when you travel one time zone over, that's what's happening on the weekend. And for a lot of us, we do this to ourselves on the weekend by sleeping in and staying up late, and we adjust our schedules every weekend just by changing our schedule from the week. So the biggest thing to note is that it is disruptive because our circadian rhythm, which is our internal body clock, runs on a 24-hour cycle. So when we artificially change that 24-hour cycle, it takes us a day or two to get it back on track. But there are some things you can do, and I'll share those with you later in this interview to help yourself. But yeah, so it definitely does disrupt you. It's impossible not to, because that circadian rhythm runs on, part of it runs on light and darkness. So when the light changes in the morning when you get up, because it's a different time now, suddenly it's an hour earlier, an hour later, then the sun's not in the right place according to what your eyes are expecting when you wake up in the morning. And that adjusts and affects our circadian rhythm.
Now you likened the shift of time zone or the changing of from daylight savings time to standard time. You likened it to traveling, where you're going through different time zones. Now, we've become very accustomed to traveling and taking flights, whether it's going to a sun destination, which is maybe a couple hours ahead or behind. And we do that quite often. So How hard of an impact is this having on our bodies when we're just changing the clocks twice a year? Is it a big impact?
Well, I mean, it has an impact just because it disrupts your cycle for a day or two. They say it takes about 1 day for every hour of time difference for your body to adjust. So it's not a huge impact. And I mean, if we were doing it, every day we started changing our clock back and forth, then yeah, that would definitely have a huge impact. What I think is it has more of a psychological impact than a physiological impact. And that's especially when we spring ahead, it's way worse, because when we spring ahead and we lose that hour, all of a sudden the clock says the wrong time, and it feels, it says the wrong thing and it feels wrong, and we're just not quite ready, and we've lost an hour, and psychologically we're like, oh my God, I lost an hour. Right? So psychologically, we get worked up by it. And that's one of my tips, is to actually set your clock on Friday night. Turn your clock ahead so psychologically you can go, oh, it's actually this time, because we're really set to a time. It's this time. That's the time I normally go to bed. So I'm going to go to bed at that time. Oh, it's not quite time yet to go to bed. I'm not going to go to bed yet. I'm going to wait. So when you set the clock ahead early, then on the Friday night, you're like, it's 9 o'clock and you normally go to bed at 10. You're like, oh, it's not quite time to go to bed yet, but it's actually 10 o'clock. And so then you get yourself adjusted, a little bit early. So that's one of the tips to use.
Now, many people across North America, including here in Alberta, think we should just ditch changing the clocks altogether and stay in daylight savings time. What are your thoughts?
I do think we should ditch the changing of the clock, but I think we should stay in standard time. And that's because there's some research out there that for people who live in the western part of the time zone, then they don't have as much sun in the morning as the rest of us do who live more eastern side of the time zone. And so that is also part of disrupting the circadian rhythm. So the standard time has sun at noon in the middle of the time zone. So people on each end are not as affected by it being too much in the morning or too much in the afternoon. The other thing is, for those of us who like night, having that extra hour of daylight in the nighttime is no big deal. But for people who are morning people, having less light in the morning and more light in the evening doesn't help them at all. It's not as good for them. So, just having standard time and not having this shift back and forth, which does disrupt our circadian rhythms twice a year, would be better to not shift, but sticking with the standard time.
Now, you promised me that you have some solutions to help us get our bodies back into the right cycle to sleep normally. Care to share?
Yeah, so the first one is, like I shared earlier, change your clock early. Start on Friday night. It's especially important for kids, to get them switching over a couple of days in advance, because you want to be, going to bed maybe a half hour later, getting up a half hour earlier for a couple of days so that when the shift happens, you're ready to get up on time. And the reason why that is so important is because of our circadian rhythm. And our circadian rhythm runs on that 24-hour cycle. And when you get up in the morning and sunlight hits your eyes, it is the kickstart to your rhythm. And that rhythm includes like what time melatonin production starts in the evening and getting your body ready to start cooling down to go to sleep at night. So when we don't go to bed on time or we don't get up on time on Sunday morning, then we're not ready to go to bed on Sunday night on time. And then that makes our Monday morning even worse. So doing that shift early is really important. For adults, actually in the fall, it's pretty simple. You could just stay up an hour later on Saturday night and just get up at your regular time Sunday morning. It's pretty easy because we do have that extra hour. So it's a lot easier. Now, the other thing to do is when you get up on Sunday morning, get outside, get some sunshine, or at least sit in an east-facing window, get as much bright light first thing in the morning to get that circadian rhythm kicked into gear. And stick to your normal eating times that you normally do. So if you normally get up at 7 and eat by 9, make sure you're eating by 9 and make sure you have your lunch at your regular time, because that is something you can control that can help get your circadian rhythm back into the rhythm of the new time shift. And that is true for no matter where you travel, to eat on the time that is in that time zone that you would normally eat at home.
And to what degree does fear and anxiety affect our sleep? Like, I know that we all stay up late when we're worrying about things and what's going to happen the next day, but can you just tell us like what degree that affects our sleep?
Yeah, stress, anxiety, those are the top reasons people can't sleep. And it's completely normal not to be able to sleep when you're under a lot of stress. Whether that's, work stress, personal stress, or just physical stress, like you're in pain, for example. It's all common reasons to not be able to sleep. But there's another stressor that most people don't think about, and that one is sleep anxiety. And that's being anxious about how much sleep you're going to get, if you're going to be able to go to sleep, if you're going to sleep through the night. Am I going to get enough sleep? How am I going to feel tomorrow if I'm not sleeping? So there's a lot of anxiety that comes with just how much sleep you're going to get and your own belief about sleep. So one of the best things you can do is I would suggest learn meditation, because meditating and helping calm your brain down has been proven to reduce cortisol levels. And that cortisol increase that happens from stress is a big part of why you can't sleep. And of course, the ruminating, the spinning of the mind is also helped by meditation.
Now let's talk about diet for a bit. Are there certain foods to stay away from that would affect our sleep? And on the other hand, are there some foods that are good for sleep?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing to note about food is that you shouldn't be eating within about a 3-hour window of going to bed. And there's a number of reasons. Digestion slows down after sleep onset. So if you eat too close to bedtime, it can cause indigestion or heartburn, which then can cause difficulty with sleeping. But there's also blood sugar levels that rise and fall. And when that happens too, that can also disrupt your sleep, make you have to get up and go to the bathroom more frequently, which is also not conducive to a good night. So the biggest thing is to be aware of what time you're eating, but then also be aware of the foods that cause you troubles. Like if a spicy food causes heartburn, then don't eat that close to bedtime.
Lana Walsh is a registered cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia coach right here in Lethbridge. Lana, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm Naveen Day on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.